Hi, welcome to class. We're the only two right now, but the other ones will show up eventually, right? I hate my life. I hate my life.
And Professor Sunreis Productions!
Hello class, Professor Sunreis here. In today's class, we're gonna take a look at a Brave virtual deck profile of mine, but this will not be the main aspect. I'm just gonna run over the deck list quickly so you can see it. More importantly, I'm gonna go over a few combos, bread and butter combos for the virtual list. It's very an unlinear form of combo just because the way the virtual engine functions and also because it has like one or two draws in it, so it can really differ mid-through combo. I'm just gonna go over a few tips and tricks I learned with the deck and how to use the virtual engine and the Brave engine optimally to get the most value in form of tempo and card advantage out of it, and most importantly how to use them both in tandem and get the most synergy out of them. So without further ado, don't forget to like and subscribe and leave the feedback down in the comment section below, and let's get right into the video. So of course, before we go into any sort of tips and tricks or anything you need to know, you need of course the deck list to know before we go into that. So let's just quickly run over everything. For the virtual engine, you basically max out on all the names because they act as starters, and then you try to play as many ways to consistently get virtual names on the field. These are the most consistent ones. I hope you didn't hear that sound. I'm gonna quickly turn that off for you guys. So the virtuals, you just want to maximize any card of them just because they are so bad alone but so good in tandem with each other. So just maximizing all the virtual names because you need the actual starters, and then all the ways to get virtuals on the field, in my opinion, is correct. You don't really do that on those because they are like just ways to get virtuals on the field, especially the Neon. The Kringlong is like a bad way to get a virtual on the field. It's only really combo if you have exactly Lulu or if you have two names with it. But it's the bare minimum you need to get the engine to function. But playing 40, it's super consistent to get a Lulu or two names. So I count these as well for ways to get virtuals on the field. And lastly, two Chucha. Don't play anything else for the traps just because they break super bad. That's it for the virtuals. Of course, Itella is an honorary virtual card in this deck. Kowloon is like super strong, of course. So for the Braves, 3 Enchantress, 1 Ride, 1 Adventure, 4 starters. Of course, these are way better. I chose this ratio because it's the best discard fodder for both Droplets and Kringlongs. And it gives you the longest grind because having 3 Enchantress means that you can use Recycle Ride 3 times out of the graveyard. 1 Griffin and 1 Draco Bag. Griffin, of course, being level 7 extender, so you can hard make Baroness with it if you have like a decent hand. So it's not too bad of a draw. It's slightly worse than Adventure, I would say. And then Draco Bag just has no value and is the brick, same as Chucha basically. I guess so actually worse. Defensive cards, 3 Droplets, super generic against everything. 3 Ash, super generic against everything. 2 Imperm, super generic against everything, but most importantly against swordsoul. Same as the 1 Token Collector. I would say roughly 60% of the meta play tokens right now, either being swordsoul or just playing Brave, and Token Collector is really good against that, and it's an extra form of disruption for Beatrice, which we make a lot of times just because we are not maxed out on the Brave cards, just because they're super bad in multiples for our deck, as we really need virtual cards to play. So Token Collector comes up a shit ton of times just because it's alive 60% of the time, I would say, and most importantly, we make Beatrice a lot to go into the Brave engine. So I really wanted to have an extra send for Beatrice if I just wanted extra disruption. A lot of times you can just send an additional Enchantress or stuff like that to get going for some grind game, but Beatrice being extra disruption is always nice. And the last card is 1 Called by the Grave. This rounds up the defensive cards. Called by the Grave, of course, is just really good against Ash and all the other hand traps which are running around currently. For the extra deck, Beatrice to set up Brave engine, Yazi to make use of a token, Barone and Chenging to make use of a token. This card is insane. It does not really seem so strong, but this is overperforming. Even if you can trigger it manually, apart from chuching it and protecting it, like kind of like a Titan. But this is still an amazing disruption, and most importantly, this will come up in grind games or against Despia. For Synchro Sixes, we play the 2 Witch Draw. We always want to trigger both of them if possible. 1 GG as a toolbox out or help to go for OTK. Sulking Crystal Wing to turn 2 level 6s into the probably best disruption available to us. Also really good with Nip coming kind of back into the format. You really don't want to miss this out. I tried testing without it because a buddy of mine told me about it. I don't really like it. 1 Shinshin, of course, our mommy, we love her. For XYZ, we have the Break Sword. I wouldn't cut this. This is an insane toolbox card and helps push for game, getting rid of your own anti-spell so you can play Brave again in your own turn. Stuff like that. This is super strong. In a pinch, it goes into Zeus, and to turn little sixes into Disruption on the opponent's turn, we have a Fan to get rid of their resources, an overlay for charge for Zeus afterwards. Or we go for an M7, get back our own resources, pick back M7 Ashes out of our graveyard, which we pitched for Quinglongs, for example. All those sort of things, or just bounce a Mirror Jade. That's it for the extra deck. I'm not going to show the side deck currently because I'm missing a few cards, but also kind of want to keep it a secret maybe for Nationals, who the fuck knows, but probably not really that important. So let's get into a combo tutorial so you know what the Brave engine, the virtual engine, sorry, kind of looks like, and afterwards we are going to go over everything you kind of want to end on against all the matchups, and then a few tips and tricks here and there for both the virtual, the Brave engine, and both of them simultaneously. So before we go over anything which resembles a combo tutorial or tips and tricks on how to use the engine properly, I think it's very important to know what you actually want to end on against all the different meta matchups right now. So I'm going to give you all the info for that. This is always what I go for, and I'm having pretty good success with it. I'm currently, I think, ranked 15 on the dueling book ladder. I'm playing against a shit ton of swordsoul and a shit ton of Despia, and it all works out great. So, speaking of Despia, as you can see, the standard board of Shenshin, Chucha, and Griffin Rider is not really that good. But the Griffin Rider, of course, is insane, and the Chucha does have its application against Fallen of Albus, or even the new Predaplan cards, or the Theater, or the Branded and Lost. Is not really that good. It's like a nice support, I guess, but Shenshin doesn't really do anything. So we really want to skip that entirely and use the tuners and non-tuners to go for a double Synchro 10 route, using the Griffin and the level 3 tuner to go into 1, and then using the Token and the level 6 tuner, lots of times this will be Coral Dragon, to go into a Chain Ying. This still gives us an Omni Negate, but most importantly, it does give us a Chain Ying, which is super hard for them to out, as the only clean out to that is Mirror Jade, and with a field full of Chuchas, Fateful Adventures, a shit ton of bodies, for example, we still want to go for a Crystal Wing with that. It becomes super hard for them to out the Chain Ying, even though we can't really properly summon that. I was not really a fan of it first because it feels super underwhelming, but it's actually really good, and you should never underestimate it. They of course sometimes even banish, so you can get value of that, but a lot of times this is just something you want to end on and kind of use it as a tower monsters to pressure them a lot. But most importantly, against Despia, you really want to prioritize to trigger both the Charge Warrior, let's get that out here, both the Charge Warrior and the Coral Dragon, just so that you get the double draw to draw into side deck cards, or more importantly, draw an Ash, because an Ash on its own can be auto-win if they don't have a way to extend past that, and if you have an Omni Negate with it, a lot of times they can't play at all, and you just get a free win if you do it like that. So that's it. Against Despia, you want to hit on double Synchro 10, Crystal Wing, and a Chucha. You want to skip the Shenshin and just hit on those and try to get in draw 2 with Charge Warrior and Coral Dragon to dig for those side deck cards or defensive cards. So against swordsoul, you always want to get the Chucha out. It's super strong against all the Tannies, because you can pop the Monks to play around the vessels. You can pop a Tai on normal summon. It's still really good and gets your engine going. You don't really need the Synchro 10. Chain Ying is really good against them, but you don't need it, and a lot of times this will just get outed by board breakers anyways, and you can't properly use its defensive abilities. So just stick on the Griffin. The Omni Negate is more than enough. More importantly, Shenshin is really good against them, so you always want to end on that. And the most important thing is you always want to end on Beatrice Swordsoul into Token Collector with the Swordsoul. Even skipping a Crystal Wing for that can be correct, just because the amount of pressure Token Collector applies to them. Protect that with an Omni Negate and a Chucha, and they have a really hard time playing it all, though of course Crystal Wing is really good, and in my opinion you should always prioritize these. And then if you have something extra, go for Beatrice, and then if you have extra you go for these. For example, if you don't have Hard Draw Brave Engine, of course you will always build the Beatrice to go into this, and then to opponent standby phase you send this, and if you have the extra resources you can go into the Crystal Wing to just round up the board. But this is usually the end board you want to go for, with the swordsoul, and it's really good, and it's one of the reasons why I feel like Brave Virtual is super strong right now, because it's like a very versatile engine against all the Mystic Mines even running around, but more importantly, it does have these hard punishers against lots of the good meta decks right now. So, versus all the punk decks which are running around right now, it's kinda hard to evaluate it, but in general, it's just like another combo / mid-range deck with a lot of graveyard setup in the form of Deer Note Fangs, for example. You play around that with the Shanshan, and holy shit, my camera is not focusing at all. So, you always want to go for Shanshan with this set just because it does hit some sort of play against them, so it at least trades 1-for-1 in a sense, and it's just an amazing form of grind game. Of course, you want to set up the Choo-Choo with that, just popping all sort of different spells, for example, the Ethereum spell or Punk spells, not Punk spells, Brave spells, if they play that, can be really good. We, of course, always want to end on the Brave engine, just because having an Omni Negate to protect the core of Choo-Choo Shanshan is really good. And if you have everything, we can go for a Crystal Wing, or if we have everything but we don't have a way to set up a spell fodder, we of course can still go for the double Synchro 10 route. Punk does banish something in their combo lots of times in the form of the Chaos Ruler, for example. So Changing will always be alive at some sort. So if we have everything, we go for either Crystal Wing or the double Synchro 10, adding to that. And even if they play the Brave engine, we can go for a Token Collector, but a lot of time they don't play that. So we really want to end on the bread and butter combo being Shanshan, Choo-Choo, Griffin Rider, and if we have a lot, we can add a Crystal Wing or the double Synchro 10 to that. So we would take that out, and it would be this. So that's it against Punk, and this is also, like I said, the bread and butter combo you can do against 9 out of 10's combo / mid-range deck. Sell it. Even stuff like, what's it called, Orcus, if it's still not played. All of these decks, they basically function the same, with a lot of times the graveyard being like a second hand, and Shanshan is just really good against that. So if you don't know what you are playing, you always want to enter on Shanshan, Choo-Choo, Griffin Rider, Crystal Wing, as it's just the safest bet against 9 out of 10 decks. So even though it's not really that popular anymore, I faced quite a few Florwunderies players on the ladder. The matchup is actually quite okay. Us playing a shit ton of wind monsters, or like half of our deck is winds, makes it so that we don't really care too much about the barrier stack here. We just have to care about the trap. But overall, the game plan does change up a little bit for the end board, just because of course Shanshan doesn't really do anything against them. So we really want to put high pressure and high emphasis on the Crystal Wing, and of course the Griffin Rider. And we don't really want to go for a double Synchro 10 route, just because the Changing dies to all of the board breakers, which they need to actually crack the board, and we can keep it. Also, it's not really good disruption against them because they don't care about being banished, and most importantly, Griffin Rider can be summoned mid-chain. So, for example, if they normal summon the one bird, doesn't matter which one it is, you can now use the Griffin Rider to summon it and then hit them mid-chain. This does play around a Dark Ruler, so we really want to go for Griffin over the double Synchro 10 route, and of course we want to add a Choo-Choo to that to hit the field spell, or to hit some of the small birds to get rid of the tribute fodder, and that's basically it. But just the sheer amount of pressure Virtual does apply against that deck, so having to play around Crystal Wing, Griffin, and Choo-Choo can be enough for them to not get into the game at all. In theory, 9 out of 10 times you will also build a Shanshan with that, just because they don't have the hand traps to really pressure our combo, and it's just something you can naturally build. So even if they crack the board because they had a Dark Ruler, evenly, whatever, you will still have a lot of grind game to just hit them back. And I really didn't have any trouble against that deck at all, unless they of course get Shifter and a shit ton of other stuff. But like 9 out of 10 times, this will be more than enough to hit a Florwunderies player's main game plan. So for a deck a lot of you are probably not too keen on, being Eldritch. Us Virtual player actually have a very easy time. I don't even know if you play Virtual here as my viewers, but if you play Virtual, you will know that this deck is super easy to beat, just because Shanshan gets rid of their whole engine, because they don't go into the grave, of course, they get banished, but not only that, they only can out this with the Eldritch in hand, because once Eldritch is in the grave, it can't actually resummon itself, because it actually needs to send to the graveyard. So if you just protect the Shanshan with a Griffin Rider or a Crystal Wing and they cannot out it, they will use their whole grind game and they cannot do anything. So just protect it with the Griffin, Choo-Choo to hit the floodgates, or to just inherently play through floodgates quite well. We don't really care about rivalry, we don't really care about there can only be one, we don't really care about Gozen. We can play around all of this accordingly. Check out my How to Play with this Eldritch guide for that. So we don't really have a struggle against that. And going second, We even have cards like Changing Burn has to get completely just run over their field. We have a Draco back to bounce Floodgates. It's really a free matchup unless you brick or they just have basically everything and you don't get into the game. But if you are going first against Eldritch, you cannot lose because the matchup is just that free thanks to Shen Shen. And last but not least, Skystriker is getting a lot of popularity with it being a very good Death Tier matchup because it can abuse Mystical Mind, probably the best out of all the decks right now. Against Skystriker, Shen Shen is almost as strong as with this Eldritch, killing like half of their engine, not being able to set up 3 spells to get that extra value of all of their spells. Raid not getting into the graveyard are all huge things. Protect that with the Griffin. Chucha being a really good against Mystic Mine, multi-roll, Rose Normal Summons is really good card against that. Crystal Wing is not really that good on the end board because you don't really want to hit their monster effects, but it's a very important card to set up early on in the combo because Skystriker does play a shit ton of hand traps and a lot of times they're also playing a nip. So I always try to build an early Crystal Wing against them just because it's the best thing you have against hand traps. And in theory, if you have a good hand, you can go Crystal Wing into Brave Engine, so now they are forced to use their nip plus 1 hand trap combo, and even after that you can still set up Chucha Shen Shen against them, and that is basically an auto win. If they use 2 hand traps, they can't really go into that, and you will always have a grind after that. But if they do break the board, this can be a quite hard matchup because it's hard to outgrind them, but if you have an established board, they can't really win against you. The double Synchro 10 route does not really come up against them as an end board. Of course, you can sometimes build this or you're forced to build it if your hand doesn't allow you to go into a Crystal Wing. But other than that, you don't really want to go for that and you just want to set up Shen Shen Chucha plus protection for that, like a lot of times. So while I said this deck doesn't really have a linear combo, Lulu Kowloon is actually one of that, though the combo can change heavily depending on the cards you have in hand. But it itself is a really good combo and you should keep it in mind. And also it really shows how to use the virtual names effectively and what you want to send with each one. So we start out with activating the Kowloon. Kowloon will activate a Chucha out of the deck. Chucha on field is always really good because this allows you to access monsters with your names. So the Lulu can search one and the Lao can send one to grave, which is really important. Lulu on the Chucha, summon itself out, send Qinglong, and then at the GG, you always want to add a GG first because it allows you to go into Synchro Sixes plays and get draws going, get stuff out of your deck you want early on, and you always want to have it in grave as early as possible so you can revive it with Lao. So we use GG on the Lulu because we really want to send a Chuchi here because we will need it later on a combo. So here we can go for a Charge Warrior to get a draw 1. This allows us to, let's just not draw anything here which we need, so we just draw a Droplet. This allows us to have a discard for the Qinglong. As you know, we still have 3 cards in hand, so we can always use one for that, and we could theoretically keep the draw for later on if we want to thin our deck first. So now we use the Qinglong to go into a Lao search. Where is it? Here's the Lao, pitching the droplets. By the way, Charge Warrior can also be here. Not that it matters. Now we use the Lao on the Chucha, sending a Neon, reviving the GG. And that's so important why we always want to use the GG first. And now, because Lao is the then effect, so it sends summon itself and then resummons from the grave. Neon is already in grave when something gets summoned out of the grave, or a level 3 gets summoned in general. So we can trigger Neon, which is like really dope, making it a tuner. And now we turn those into a Beatrice. You could also go for a Crystal Ring if you have a hard draw Enchantress, for example, or if you have a set fodder, or if for some reason Omni Negate is worse than a Monster Negate. Use the Lao, use the Beatrice, send Lao. You always want to get the virtuals into the graveyard, just as the habit, so you have the fodder for Juju, so you can get them back with M7, or you can get them back with GG in the end phase. For example, if you had a Lulu in here, we don't want to add back Lulu, but we want to add back Lao, and that way we always have that available to us. We want to send the Enchantress here, use the Enchantress, get back, let's put them here so you can see the banished pile. Get the right, activate the right, get the adventure and get a token. And now we still need a discard fodder. We could of course use it one out of our hand, but we can also just hard make Shenshin here by activating Chucha on the Neon. So we now have a 6 and a 3, doesn't really matter if it's on Neon or GG at all. So now we go into Shenshin, chaining 1 Adventure, chaining 2 Chucha, Neon, recycling the Chucha. You always want to recycle the Chucha first because Chucha is your whole grind game. In a sense that recycles your resources, so in theory the Chucha could still get disrupted next turn and we don't get to recycle them, so we always want to get out the Chucha out of the banished pile ASAP. So now the adventure triggers, giving ourselves a Draco back, and then we can use the adventure, pitch Draco back, summon Griffin, Draco back would re-equip itself, and in the end phase GG will add itself add a virtual back. 9 out of 10 times it's Lulu or Lao. So these two cards ended on a pop, an Omni Negate, a Floodgate monster with an insane amount of grind game in the form of an adventure on the field, a Shenshin which can resummon itself, a GG adding back. So we have immediate virtual engine either with Shenshin or with Chucha if they don't out it. Beatrice in theory can still send an Enchantress as follow-up, a Qinglong as follow-up. Even a Chucha if you really need it, but most of the time it will send a token collector if you're playing against anything of that sort. And as you can see, we could in theory have Snow in a deck, but we don't really have that much of a graveyard fodder to set up, so that's the main reason I'm on token collector and not Snow or something like that. Of course, we still could have more cards in hand. For example, if you have a hard drawn Brave Engine, you can always just skip the Beatrice and go for a Crystal Ring instead and use the Brave Engine even as a set fodder, but we'll get to that later on in some tips and tricks. So speaking of that, let's get into a few tips and tricks with the deck. So now that you know how the virtual engine functions in the form of Lulu plus Kowloon, like it's the bare minimum you need to know, and you know what to want to end on against all the different matchups, it's very important to get maximum value out of all the virtual plays, and I'm gonna give you a few tips and tricks here to just get that extra oomph out of the engine. So most importantly, as you would already know from the quick combo tutorial, getting access to Kowloon is very important. You can actually get access to Kowloon even if you don't hard draw it with Lulu, because you can, instead of adding Chucha, send Qinglong, you can also send Chucha at Kowloon. This play is a little restricted in my version because we are only playing 2 traps, but it's nothing really to worry about too much, because if you hard draw a trap, it's not going to happen a lot of times. So overall, if you have a way into a virtual, so either one of these, because we are ignoring Kowloon, or another one of these to just normal summon them, and then you have Lulu plus any other name, let's say it's this one, you can actually use the other name to send the Qinglong, and then use the Lulu to send the Chucha at Kowloon. That way you will always have access to Kowloon, making it so that Lao can send a Neon later on in the combo, resummoning a GG and giving access to either Charge Warrior or everything you want, and just giving the most out of the virtual engine. So if you can see how I ordered the virtual cards here, this is no accident. You always want to resolve, if possible, Lulu, GG, and Lao in that order, like I've shown you in the Kowloon Lulu combo tutorial, just because Lulu will give you the most value in the form of Chucha, GG will give you the follow-up, and Lao is really strong, especially with the Kowloon you got off the Lulu, and resummoning of GG, and then giving access to Neon to start to recycle your resources, and most importantly giving you the 1 extra draw. Lily is a weird name. It does open up quite interesting combos, but lots of time will just be a generic name to get your engine rolling. It does open up Beatrice lines early on because it sends a Chucha and a Qinglong. So in theory, even with just a Neon or normal summon of GG, this will give you access to a Beatrice. But most importantly, this is a Crystal Wing on the 4th summon with just an E-Teller or a Lulu, because you can normal summon the Lulu. Lily effect, sending Qinglong and Chucha. I hope you can guys see this. You can't actually see this. So let's put it all over here a little. So, like I said, normal summon Lulu, use Lily on that, send Qinglong and Chucha, and then you can use the Chucha on the Lulu to get Lulu to 6, and then you can synchro these off for Tzolk'in. Get the Tzolk'in as the 3rd summon, and now you just need a set fodder to get going. Lots of time this will be a Kowloon. Set it and trigger the Crystal Wing, And now on 4th summon we have a Crystal Wing. This is very important in nib heavy formats. We are currently not in one, but we are maybe heading into one again. So this will be very strong. So Lily plus E-Teller or Lulu and a Kowloon. Lots of time you really want to go into that with an E-Teller. So E-Teller, Lily plus Kowloon is a very good combo to play through nib quite safely. But other than that, Lily doesn't really have lots of value. So you try not to get to it too often, making it so that you will never really search it with Qinglong unless you have every other name. And it's just a consistency piece and not really something you need to put a lot of priority on. Lastly, to add to that, as you all hopefully know, I'm just going to tell you that the virtual engine itself is just really a rank 6 turbo toolbox in a sense, because you will have the 3s to go into Synchro Sixes to get pluses of the Charge Warrior and the Coral Dragon, and after that you try to put those into rank 6s. So a lot of time you will have a Crystal Wing. It's basically a rank 6 thanks to the token. So that's one payoff for that, and you have the Beatrice for that next to the Brave engine, which also has really good Brave synergies, which will go on in the next clip. But most importantly, in a pinch, you can also summon an M7 and get back that one Ash, that one Nib, that one DD Crow, which you had to use early on for either the Brave engine or the Qinglong. So in a pinch, if you have, for example, a Heartthrown Brave engine and you already went into a Crystal Wing, you can early on in the combo actually pitch the Ash and keep like another card in hand, for example a Droplet, and then use the M7 later on in the combo to actually pitch that back, and always turn 2 level 6s into a form of disruption, which is very important to just maximize the amount of tempo you generate out of the virtual engine, because believe it or not, Shan Chuchu is really good, but other than that the deck kinda doesn't do a lot, so it's always very important to get that going. For example, if you don't have a way to set fodder, it can be very important to do that with the M7, because you will lack the disruption and you always just want to get the maximum amount out of it, just because the deck just has such an amazing grind game, and if you have enough disruption so that your opponent can't break your board, you automatically win because you will just kill them the next turn. So that's it for the things you need to know about the virtual engine. Of course, this is just like the tip of the iceberg, and like just a theory. In game, this will differ greatly depending on the game state, depending on the deck cards you still have in deck, depending on a lot of factors which are like very hard to evaluate and to put into consideration when talking about the deck. So that's why I can just recommend you to check out my stream. The link is down in the description below, or just take a look at the replays I do, and just ask questions if you have any of them, and I can 9 out of 10 times explain you my thought process behind every decision I do in game. But overall, just getting the maximum value out of the virtual engine is not that hard. It does take some form of practice, but in my opinion, it can be done quite easily because it's only really 4 names. It might seem complicated at first, but it's only 4 names, so it's like 4 lines of play you do. So just remembering all of them is not that hard in my opinion. So let's get into the Brave engine and the art of Brave control, because trust me, this is a win condition on its own. So welcome to the art of Brave control. This is by no means an exaggeration. You can win games with Brave on its own, but we'll get to that later. Brave Virtual World is not like other Brave decks where the Brave engine is just the first thing you throw at the opponent to bait an Ash, and then you do your other plays afterwards. In this deck, there's so much synergy hidden, like not that deep. It's quite easy to understand, but I'm just gonna tell you to it. So first of all, why it's important not to throw out the Enchantress as soon as possible all the times. Well, that is because we are currently in a fusion-based format where the best deck of the format is the fusion-based deck, or arguably the best deck. Maybe it's not anymore. But overall, an Omni Negate is just really good for the end board and will give you a lot of tempo, because the virtual engine itself cannot end on an Omni Negate currently, at least not that I know. So actually resolving the Brave engine is super important, not only because of an Omni Negate, but because you can also really easily grind with that. But how do you do that? Well, if you have 2 virtual names and 1 virtual on the field, for example, you have E-Teller, GG Lily, or example, something like that. So you have 2 ways to trigger get a Qinglong engrave, and 1 way to get a body on the field. You will always want to keep the Enchantress in the hand and use the virtual place to go into a Crystal Wing first, so you force out hand traps, and then you can use the Enchantress actually as the Crystal Wing fodder to have a set or you can use it as a queen long discard later on in combos or early on in combos. So remember, guys, if you have 2 virtual names in hand and 1 virtual way to get a virtual on the field plus Enchantress, you won't want to use the Enchantress as soon as possible as the first action, just because it giving you a grind game, it giving you an Omni Negate is all really important for you having the strongest possible end board, especially against Despia. So now that we know that the Brave Engine doesn't have to be and just glorified called by the Grave for the deck, while it a lot of times will just be the first action you do, especially if you only have like 1 virtual name and 1 e-teller, for example. You can have different value with it, and you can play Brave Control on its own. So what do I mean with that? Well, if you, for example, take a look at a Bricky hand with Virtual, it would probably be a hand where you only have 1 name or you have no name at all. And lots of times this will mean you will probably have a few hand traps, or you will have Brave plus maybe a Lulu, for example. You can actually still get quite a big value out of just Enchantress plus Lulu, and I'm gonna show you what you can do with that. So you activate the Enchantress, banish itself, search the right. You will activate the right. I'm gonna put it here, right? No, I'm putting it here. You activate the right, summon yourself a token, and giving you an adventure out of the deck. So this is the banish pile, this is the grave, we just put it here. So now we have that, this is in our hand, this goes to the graveyard. So now we normal the Lulu, triggering the adventure, giving us Draco back in our hand. Now we use the adventure to trigger, pitch the Draco back, and actually not add a Griffin, but add an Enchantress. Reason for that is because we can just go into a Baroness with these. Draco back will re-equip itself, it doesn't matter, because we special summon Enchantress with her effect. Go into a Coral Dragon, and then turn these 2 into a Baroness. Triggering the Coral Dragon, giving us a draw. This goes into the graveyard, and then we still have 3 other cards in hand. A lot of times these will be defensive cards, so it's probably safe to say you have like maybe Droplet plus Ash with that or something, and you actually end on quite a few disruptions. But most importantly, if the opponent can't get rid of the adventure, we have Enchantress plus Griffin still in deck, so next turn we can actually start to play Griffin control after we played Baroness control for a turn, and that's actually quite a bit of tempo and disruption you can put on your opponent, even with a bad hand. So even if it might look bad and you can't actually play Virtual Walls with it, you can actually still play Brave Control, and you can have huge success with it. I have won games where I haven't activated a single Virtual Field hand effect, just because of just sitting on Baroness and Griffin token can be enough. And of course, Griffin, the Baroness, if you top deck any name, it can, if it stays on the field, of course, it can always summon back the Lulu out of the graveyard, and suddenly you have a Virtual name on the field and in the hand, and you can start to play Virtual. So don't be discouraged by seeing a hand with just 1 Virtual, and as long as you have Brave Engine plus hand traps, you can win any game. So lastly, in a similar vein of using the Enchantress to go into a Coral Dragon, you can actually later on in the combo use the Enchantress to trigger a Neon, which you cannot trigger otherwise, and to still get an Omni Negate with the same route, with just Neon, the tuner, Enchantress, the non-tuner go into Coral Dragon, and then go into a Baroness afterwards. This still gives you the same amount of Omni Negate in 1, gives you the Enchantress engage, gives you 1 draw, and keeps the Griffin in the deck. This makes it so that the adventure is actually a really big part of your end board, because your opponent really wants to get rid of that, because it just means a guaranteed Omni Negate next turn, which is really good. So guys, keep that in mind. This is not just Griffin Turbo. Lots of times you actually want to search an Enchantress, not only because it gives you an Omni Negate, but because it gives you an Omni Negate in 2 forms of follow-up, with the Enchantress Engrave and the draw you can use next turn for the Fateful fodder, for example. This is also really important if you think about back to the Despia matchup, where I said you always want to go for the draw 2 if possible. Lots of times you will actually go with that route against them, because this will give you that 1 extra draw, and it doesn't make any sense to keep the Coral Dragon into the deck. Post turn 1, it's super hard to get a value of that. So always keep that in mind, guys. Having that 1 Enchantress Engrave can be insane, especially because of the extra deck synergies or toolbox cards it offers, being the Yazi, the Baroness, like I said, and the Chinging. Where's the Baroness? I can't find it again. Anyways, you know it's somewhere here. So just think there's the Baroness to that. These cards in a grind game offer so much value and so much board breaking presence, it's insane. So guys, if you try to figure out the combos, always think if you can get that Enchantress into the grave again, This will give you so much follow-up, it's insane. The token is just so valuable for the deck because this is cards which you don't really have access to otherwise. So they offer unique synergies which you can't really get into. Changing being super hard to out and having an additional fun effect is not that special, but it being super hard to out is really good. But Yazi, more importantly, is an insane card. People don't expect it, like I said. And this just outs boards by itself, just triggers impermanences, gets rid of problematic cards, and then just giving you a virtual world on the field just because you have that one Enchantress extra in the grave is super important. So lastly, this is something very important which I had to learn with the deck as well. In the beginning, I had a very hard time to figure out the routes where I could go for a Crystal Wing. I was like, it's so hard to get the set fodder, but actually the Brave Engine is a set fodder itself because you have 3 Enchanters, super accessible by Beatrice, you have a 1 Hard Run Ride, you have the Adventure, but most importantly, you can also just search the Draco back and don't use it as a discard, but use it as a set fodder, maybe pitch the Ash instead, get that back up with an M7, and then use that to trigger your Crystal Wing, or something like that. So you have super accessible set fodder for your token lines with the Brave Engine. So that's one of the plenty synergies you have with the Virtual Engine, being able to trigger Neon, giving you insane toolbox cards in the form of Yazi, and most importantly giving you that extra form of follow-up by going for a Baroness with the Search of Enchantress instead of Griffin, and having that extra engine next to the Virtual Engine in a grind game where you actually kind of play like 2 decks almost, because the Virtual Engine is so strong in a grind game already, and just having that Griffin control next to that is borderline impossible to beat in my opinion. So lots of time just having that one Enchantress engraved, like I said before, can be really important, so try to play accordingly to that. And that's basically it for the video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it and could learn something from Virtual. Like I said, it's kind of hard for me to do combo tutorials because these combo tutorials will always differ depending on what you draw. So every combo is basically different, apart from like Lulu plus Kowloon, and even that can differ. For example, with the Charge Warrior, if you draw an Enchantress, you will go into a Crystal Wing instead of Beatrice, stuff like that. And so in my opinion, it's not really worth it to just do like raw test hands, because they are not really applicable to a real game state. But if you want to see some live footage with that and see some plays explained, just check out my stream. Link is down in the description below, like I said, or just check out the replays, like I said. I hope you enjoyed this. Professor Sunreis out. Peace.